Record.
Hello and welcome to DXDAO's weekly strategy call, Friday, October the 28th. Today on the agenda, we got restructuring and refocus phase two. We're going to talk about swappers' emissions and marketing plans. And if we've got, we got Zed here. We could also talk about Nimi's incubation. Keenan posted on DAO Talk a new proposal, basically phase two of the restructuring and refocus plans. He also did a really interesting, inspiring presentation during the retreat, and it would be interesting for those who couldn't make it to hear about it. Keenan, if you'd like to take the stage.
Yeah, thanks, Nathan. And I don't know
Cheers.
if it's any specific reason, but you sound especially like a radio host today. So glad to have you hosting
Cheers.
this. Yeah, like Nathan said, finally got the phase two post up a little later than I would have liked to, but there was a lot to kind of consider. So let me kind of run through the post. I guess first of all, like the current status, I think most of us here know. But October 3rd, we passed the follow-up proposal, phase one, that included the three key actions that I won't dive into here, but the event budget, auditing budget, length and frequency of calls, etc. And now, of course, being phase two time, which we've been focusing on the last month. And I think it's good, and I tried to highlight here, but the idea of phase two isn't to have all of the answers, but instead point to a direction, in a sense that there will still be questions, of course, and I don't think anyone can solve things without these questions, kind of in the small amount of time that we've had to focus on phase two. But instead pointing to okay, this would be a good solution. And then phase three is like, how do we get there? What do we need to do to get there? So I chatted a bit about findings and discussions from the DX retreat. Let me take a look here. I basically highlighted like the findings of kind of working with lateral, and the presentations that kind of went through. So of course I started with the recap that Nathan kind of mentioned. That just ran through everything up until that stage, phase one, the proposals, etc. There wasn't much to abstract from that for use in phase two, but it was pretty valuable, in my biased opinion, in setting up the stage for kind of the discussions and like, okay, this is where we are, this is where we're going. Next up, of course, was Chris, who kind of led the structure focused talk, or accountability and governance. And by the way, I have the presentations linked in this thread and they're highlighted. So if you're looking to look at the actual slides, you can find them in the post. But the three kind of highlights there from the governance side is Chris calls them three new pillars. So a 6-month budgetary cycle for squads, which would usurp the traditional free-for-all contributor proposal process. The implementation of a layer between execution and governance to provide an unbiased accountability to product initiatives, and a priority board that lives downstream of overarching goals and vision of DXDAO. So those are kind of the main structural changes, and I see a comment from Venki we'll touch on in a minute when we're kind of running through the 5 main topics here. That leads us to moving forward, or my talk on vision and direction, which was on, I think, the Wednesday in Cartagena. But basically, I say here, the goal was to highlight our current lack of direction and where we can point to in the future. I had a highly opinionated presentation based on individual squads. And I say here, the most important thing is that not everything was new ideas, really. A lot of these were kind of just things that we were talking about for a long time. Instead, it's like this collection of existing discussions compiled into this digestible format that we can actually execute upon at the squad level. So that was kind of the goal. I think, of course, I have it linked in the chat there with some fun art, so I would take a look. But the kind of main things I tried to add was kind of like, what is a vision? What is the definition of vision versus direction and priorities, and why do we need it? And then pointing to like where we're going and how the pieces come together. So I think it went incredibly well, particularly those talks when we all chatted and kind of deliberated some of the things from all of these presentations and the lateral side of things. The discussions were incredibly healthy. Things moved in the right direction. Questions weren't intimidating or anything. So it was fantastic to see that process, and that kind of leads us to today, which is the phase 2 kind of off-chain consensus collection. I note here that we kind of have this yes or no off-chain informal consensus collection, in the sense that we want to take it to a proposal that will pass, and how do you reach that? So this isn't like, oh, let's use off-chain polls to decide, the way that we're going forward, but instead it's like, okay, do you agree with this or you disagree with this? Ignoring any semantics or anything, any individual kind of pieces of it. And if you can't vote yes, what would it take for you to lean in that direction? I think that I note here, it just kind of simplifies consensus collection and removes a lot of stress in the process. And inefficiency, of course. And I think this approach was very successful in phase 1. So hopefully, and I can see, we'll chat in a second with this, the polls are looking relatively clean so far. We'll talk about it in a second. Yeah. And I just reiterate here, the signal proposal for phase 2 does not require DXDAO to have the perfect solution to each of its issues, but instead can identify an equitable path forward, even if it will require additional exploration within phase 3. So direction, I guess, is the key word, and kind of understanding the goal of what we're trying to pass through in phase 2. So on that note, there's kind of the governance and structure area. There's 3 polls for this that include the budgetary cycle, squad accountability councils, and the priorities board. Chris, kind of because you led the presentation, I don't want to bore people with my half asleep voice here. I don't know if you want to talk to those individual points, and then maybe I can kind of answer Venki's questions.
Yeah, I think Venki's questions and some of the other comments in there and that you were saying all kind of come into this, like, how much do we know what the structure is versus how much do we need to have some consensus to move forward in that direction. So I think, like, for instance, like starting with like a budget, all the kind of questions Venki laid out, I think we can have some answers now, but we haven't obviously codified all of that. But if we want to codify all of that, it takes time and effort to like put forth a process or come through with different solutions for that. Like, for instance, I think if we do, the budget, the 6-month budget, that's going to require just a lot more work by everyone involved in like a squad leadership position. And so I think if we're going to answer those questions and kind of put an overall structure on it, we need to have some idea of it going forward. Having said that, I think just in terms of like where to try to get into specifics in terms of what we can do more, or what I think would be expected. I think broadly the goal of this structure is to give squads autonomy. So if you look at the kind of a lot of the questions I think that Venki was going through, a lot of those questions are like, well, will the squad be able to do this? Will the squad be able to do that? And I think as like a DXDAO governance perspective, we kind of just push those ideas onto the squad itself. And so for Swapper Squad, that may actually have a slightly different governance structure than another squad that's making decisions. So maybe we need to have different ways of how those squads make decisions. But I think by and large, the only thing that governance is doing or approving is like that budget at the beginning of the term. Now, of course, that budget is going to have specific roles and likely people associated with it that is getting approval to pay that out. So if you do want to hire someone as a squad, you're going to have to get approval in your 6-month budget for that role to be included so that you can hire that person. And then the squad itself will have some ability or some autonomy to actually select the person that they want. But again, then that's coming up after 6 months. They're going to have to go back to governance and get reapproval for that role. So I think that's where the accountability comes in terms of like governance there, and that the squad really has the autonomy to act as they see fit. And I think this even gets into like compensation within the squads, and then the contractors within the squads. Like, I think that should all really be up to the squad itself. If they can get the job done by hiring one person at a level 8, then like they should do that. If they want to do 4 people at level 2, they should do that. If they can get a contractor, they can kind of do all that. I don't necessarily think you need to have governance making those restrictions on the squad itself. I do think that the squads will end up borrowing a lot of process and standards from DXDAO itself. So I actually think, for instance, like the pay scale, the compensation structure probably still makes sense for squads to use internally as they're thinking about making these decisions about rising and going above. And I think that it's also very helpful for all of those squads to be on that structure when governance is evaluating the budgets, because there's some similarity between the different squad budgets, and we can kind of easily know how much a level 7 or whatever is. And then I think the same way in terms of borrowing from the resources of DXDAO. Like, I think the Contributor X squads like goal is to help onboard contributors to DXDAO, like kind of squads and products, and so they could still be providing that service to others, even if it's more of onboarding to the squad as opposed to just onboarding to DXDAO as a whole.
And I guess even more high level approach to that is just for example, Venki says, would squads have autonomy over who they onboard, offboard, and then our squads as dev squads, or should squads take into account the growth, marketing, biz dev? Obviously, this is a very complex topic. I mentioned this on the retreat, specifically about DX Voice and DX Biz. But it's like there needs to be autonomy on both the operations side as well as the product side, in my eyes. And I think a strong piece of phase 3 is going to be how exactly these pieces interconnect. Because if DX Biz and DX Voice specifically can't integrate directly with these autonomous squads, especially pertaining to a larger kind of goal in like flagship product, for example, then should those squads exist is kind of the question. So I want to talk a bit more about that and kind of how they interlink. But I think like Chris kind of highlighted, the most important thing is the autonomy of each squad and allowing them to make those decisions. Another thing to kind of think about, and another reason why phase 3 will be so important is you mentioned, let me just read it here. Would squads have autonomy over who they onboard, offboard, or should be done through Contributor X? Kind of, I know I already read that, but I think it's like we want Contributor X to have that autonomy to kind of assist or have some kind of say in that and work directly with the squads. So I think it's like exploring exactly how they can be autonomous makes sense for phase 3. And I don't know if we can really just have the answer, like overnight, in my eyes. That's my perspective, though. Open to alternative views, of course.
And also, bringing up such questions, it seems like it's not hard for us to reach any consensus, but these are kind of like the structure that the DAO has and follows is like a contract, and it has these different sections, and those sections have articles to them. How do we put those micro agreements on chain so that they're ratified, and that once on one side people can easily look into without asking questions? For example, if a new person joins the DAO, instead of asking people about how the DAO is functioning, they should be just pointed to a place where they could see this, like an on-chain proposal that's been passed, instead of asking people. And on the other hand, it would help with like disagreements later on did we agree on this or not?
I think that's the power of.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I think that's the power of the priorities board. I'm not sure you had a chance to dig into that aspect, Chris, but I think it's something that runs downstream from kind of vision and goals. And I imagine this priority board will be, the idea is like a monthly check-in. Chris, you can kind of talk more to it, but that would be kind of enacted on chain as a gospel place.
Yeah, I think there's two parts or elements of what I'm hearing from Nathan there is like before you even get to the priorities board, there's a little like what is the overall flow and structure of DXDAO governance really in terms of making these decisions, and not just if you're like a new contributor, but like I think this same process can be used to like you could have a new product idea or a new grant idea, and you could propose like a 6-month budget directly to DXDAO to say, I'm going to, I've got 2 people who I'm going to work to launch this new product or whatever. And it's going to help DXDAO out in this specific way, or it's going to, solve this one specific problem. So I think that we can, having a clear idea of how this structure works, both for like existing groups and squads that are producing value for DXDAO, but also I think in the future, I think is really important. And I think like the key part of that is just documentation. And I think documentation in a whole bunch of ways, and it's just kind of communicating this in a more public way. And I think that's what we need to do over the next couple months is not only get like a proposal that lays out some of this additional structure so that it's kind of ratified on chain, but then go through the process of like, how is that communicated more broadly, and how is that accessible to new people? And so I think once you get through like the structure or communicating the structure of how things operate, then I think you need to get into like the communicating the ongoing operations of the ongoing priorities of DXDAO, and that's like what we're kind of trying to achieve here with this priorities board, which is like, okay, we need kind of a constant check-in with governance, with different stakeholders in DXDAO on like what the major priorities are, so that when squads are executing on the vision, that they have an idea of what the overall priorities, so they can put that in a better thing, in a better framework. So I think this could take the place of like a monthly check-in, in terms of like this is the main task and priorities, and this is again accessible for new people coming into DXDAO, like just as a like, hey, like things are going, maybe things are operating and it's hard to see what's going on, but having that check-in and be like, this is actually the main things we're all working on and we're all focused on, even if like every week it seems like there's a different story that we have to kind of shift to there, having that kind of check-in. I think the on-chain endorsement of that is going to be, I guess it's just a little bit of a tricky problem. I haven't exactly thought how we can do that. I think we maybe need to have some additional like polling and signaling tools within DAO Talk if we're trying to like get some understanding of what DXDAO thinks is a priority. But I think that definitely needs to be an element of it, and it's just as important, I think, as that constant communication so that people are aware and aligned on what the overall priorities are.
Yeah, I mean, if we want to push for phase 2, where we have these squad budgets, I mean, I have already started working on these squad budgets for Swapper with Z, and I mean, we need some of these answered at least. Like, I mean, should I already budget for DX Voice, BizDev, or um, if so, I have no idea how to budget for marketing spend and the BizDev spend. So I've got to probably understand what kind of budget would be there for that, and then
I would presume that Keenan has an idea of whether DX Voice can provide that service or not, or and Sky kind of knows. And so I think DXDAO wants to fund biz dev or growth for Swapper. And honestly, I do think long term it would be good for Swapper to have that stuff internally. But in terms of who's filling that role, I think DXDAO is agnostic at this point. So it would be like someone needs to include that in their budget. And I guess if you'd ask me, I think it's probably better for that budget to be included in DX Voice for now, but making sure it's accounted for now and then maybe going forward, that's different. Where it falls under or what squad it falls under could change.
I think the idea from our end is DX Voice will do its best to use its resources to support DXDAO's current priorities, in the sense that if a budget is voted through and DXDAO deems it like a medium priority, then DX Voice will do its best to support it in a medium capacity. It's kind of like a very broad, overarching level. But just to kind of answer the last question you had, Venki, with can we engage with contractors again? I think we kind of answered this. But like I said, I think it's really up to the team in the sense that you'll have a budget and you can spend it whichever way you want. Hypothetically, you can move away from the pay scale that we have at DXDAO. You can do whatever you want with that budget. The only thing is you get money and you need to accomplish what is stated in this 6-month budget. And I also think that, Chris, you can correct me if I'm wrong. The idea is to kind of work through all this in phase 3 and start with the trailing 6-month budget process for the first month of the year, of course. So we can run from January to June without any complication. Sorry.
Yeah, and I think this would be a process, and like it's not so much of just Venki and Zet preparing a budget and then that going to vote. Like I think there will need to be. I think there should be a more formal process of like, budgets are submitted at this date, and then there's a discussion for a week or two. There's a call, and then maybe revisions or anything like that, and we try to get things in. So I think as part of this, we also want to introduce some process to how these budgets are processed through governance, because that's actually where the insight, like the input, the valuable feedback can come through, is when those discussions are happening. And so I think in terms of like how this would work going forward, I think that the timeline really is, can we get this a structure, an overall process and structure approved by DXDAO governance and start to implement it for things starting January 1st for 6 months. The only thing I was like thinking about is whether it makes sense to have some things be a little staggered, so it's like not like we're always doing budget things in June and December for all squads. Maybe we have half the squad start then and half the squad elsewhere. I'm not sure if that makes it easier. Russ says stagger. Yeah,
like process starting in the new year makes, of course, a lot of sense to me. And maybe like a monthly kind of cadence, Swapper, DXGov, kind of operations side of things.
Wouldn't it be better to just do it together? I mean, for DXDAO's benefit, if you stagger it, Swapper goes first and then gets an approval, and then DXGov goes next, and then they don't get enough budget because for whatever reasons, and the market has changed, or don't you think it's better if that's the way it happens in normal companies, right?
Yeah, I think there's two things to consider on that front, and I generally agree. I think voter apathy and voter attention is difficult, and I think the worst case outcome of this process is implementing all this process. Everyone does their budgets at the same time, and just no one wants to take the time to really evaluate them. That would be a negative in my eyes, and kind of unique to the way we operate. Bureaucracy would be the issue. I guess that's kind of like the main thing. I think it's also, we want this to be like a living, breathing. I mean, of course, we are a living, breathing organization. And I think things are a little bit more dynamic. I agree that starting things where some projects starts, get their budget, and then next month another one. I think the start of that might be a bit rocky, like you just described. But I think long term and every budget beyond this first one, I actually see it as a more dynamic process, and we can kind of think okay, what are we doing? How can we fit things into this? That's my kind of perception. I would be happy either way, though.
Cool. Yeah, as Chris said, this is something that will take some time, maybe a couple of months if we're efficient. It's great that it was posted just last night, and so many people already commented on it. And it seems like we all love Venki's questions, straight on point. That can help us further pan out this, structure it properly, and move on. As these would probably be the guiding tenets for how the DAO would operate, and it's very important that everybody raises any concerns they got and we iron them out. We're probably forgetting something. It's a work in progress. So keep being active. If you need to take another read at it, like over the weekend, it's a complex thing. Think of all the questions that may rise, put them on a DAO talk, and let's all discuss, because otherwise it's gonna be it's gonna take longer, and it's not like for just Chris or Keenan to bother with this, and for us to say 3 months down the line we don't like it. Why did we do it that way? Like, this is your chance to chime in and say whatever you got to say, and if you feel like something needs to be included, this is the time to do it. So next, we got
just super quick.
Yeah,
Nathan. Programming is insane on you today. I'm not sure where this radio man is coming from, but we do have to quickly talk about the vision and direction side of things. Venki kind of mentioned, I didn't get to them quite yet, if that's okay with you.
I'd love to hear that as well.
Excellent. Yeah, so on the vision and direction side of things, sorry for ruining the programming here. There's kind of two key actionable direction focused things to kind of put through in phase 2. The first of which is this broad overarching vision, and that's true north has kind of become a little bit of a meme, but that's really what it is. So the question is, should DXDAO formally establish its true north or vision statement as enable community freedom? And I think the context I put here is quite valuable in understanding why we should do this. I say DXDAO hasn't had a formal vision maybe ever, although some have tried. It's more clear now than ever that it's required to look back upon and guide our decision making. Enable community freedom kind of points to our approach of solving problems in DAOs as a DAO, DAO first organization. I think we're here because we strongly believe DAOs are the future of coordination. We're kind of putting in the effort to create that freedom for ourselves. And you could very easily wager that our overarching goal is to create that freedom for all online communities, in the sense that we are building for ourselves first, and know how to guide that process to create freedom to communities kind of globally. We want to onboard all communities into kind of DAO formats. And this is a good conversation we had at the retreat, actually. Sky was mentioning that all GitHub repos will be DAOs in like 5 years, stuff like that. And it's like, how can we provide autonomy to these kind of organizations is the fun kind of overarching vision. And just as a last contextual piece, I say the statement should be a vague yet powerful overarching narrative that we all connect with, whereas a mission statement would articulate an approach to solving it, which I interpret as a key action of phase 3 is understanding, okay, what exactly are we doing to enable community freedom, right? And of course, we're pointing to that direction here in the next segment, which I'll talk about. But I think discovering exactly what that is and putting together a mission statement will be a key action of phase 3 in my eyes. And that leads me to the last voted piece. Where are we going? The question is, should DXDAO formally establish its direction as a decentralized pipeline for communities and look to prioritize a flagship product that interconnects current and future product initiatives? This is all surrounding the idea of, and this has been an idea for some time, it's not a new idea, But DXDAO should be building products that exist in some kind of pipeline. Of course, suite of products has been a kind of term dog-fooded over the last while. Really, I think the presentation does this more justice than this form thread. But the idea is to create a suite of products that are fully interconnected, kind of revolving around our governance base. And so I described like this really creates an incredible moat, especially in an open source kind of way, because we've seen discussions in the past of like, oh, maybe we should, we've seen some people come in and say like, maybe we should close source so we can have a moat. I don't think that's the approach. The approach instead is to provide something that is so great and interconnect it within its own ecosystem that of course you could come and fork any individual piece or even the whole pie. But that would take away from this ecosystem that we've created and the communities that are built around it. So the idea is kind of to capture communities that want to decentralize or projects that want to launch, and lock them into this ecosystem by, say, you come and launch a token, natively in that kind of token raise contract, a portion of that is locked immediately into Swapper as permanent LP. You get a DAO directly in Davi. You get kind of social tools. Let me bring up the presentation here. I was going to share it in the chat, but I guess maybe I'll share my screen quick. Can you see my screen? Sweet. Yeah, so let's quickly, this is kind of a good slide. I wish you could share just a photo in the chat. But this is kind of like based on our current initiatives and what we kind of have now, what does this like mothership, flagship product look like? And I imagine it as this, I want the products to exist in their own capacities. For example, if we have a tight Carrot integration with this flagship product, Carrot should still exist on its own. I mean, its contract still exists. There's no reason for it not to have its own front end. Would be a bit silly. But instead, kind of DXDAO focusing its efforts on this ecosystem makes a lot of sense to me. So I'm not sure you can see my mouse in this screen share, but kind of taking this pipeline as Davi being this like core underlying piece of the DXDAO puzzle. Of course, we have like instant treasury and governance when you launch a token, or companies looking to centralize, they onboard directly into our governance framework. May need Aqua for kind of equity, and then like integrations directly into governance of like, okay, maybe there's some fun things we can do to get some fees and kind of provide a service like, for example, documentation hosting using docs.eth. Maybe we have some kind of native mixing for DAOs using Mix, built-in GAS, social layer, etc. And it's kind of just how do we build around, create an experience, lock people into it with permanent liquidity. And of course, no one's truly locked, but if you're participating in the ecosystem, there's no reason to want to leave, right? So example, Carrot can offer conditional sale conditions where, NFTs are minted when certain milestones are reached or something along those lines. It's like, how do we build this all together now into this product? And more importantly, going into the future, how do we add to it and kind of expand that pipeline? I think is very important to future decision-making and kind of product initiatives in my eyes. That's like the very bare bones interpretation of it. Of course, DXDAO being here, the kind of focus to this was to see like where we can be profitable. Because this is something that I've talked about for a while, but I don't know if Davi itself can be a profitable tool, in the sense that governance probably shouldn't be a service that is paid for. I don't think it's scalable in the sense that it might not catch on when there's so many free governance frameworks. So my perception of kind of like the profitability of our efforts and the fact that we're stewards of governance. I mean, every single conference we've been to, we've been reminded that we're ahead on governance, and some fun quotes like that. So it's instead kind of locking into this ecosystem and pointing directly to things to siphon fees in a way that like we don't become profitable because Davi has some kind of like governance, not governance as a service, but you're not paying for your governance base on Davi. Instead, you're launching a token and having liquidity directly through Swapper, native interconnectivity of maybe DAOs can directly interact with the Swapper contracts to do swaps. That goes to the eco router. Fun stuff like that is kind of the idea for the baseline.
Have we done some sort of pre-sale activity over guilds to figure out if there are more projects that wants to create guilds with Davi? And yeah, I mean, how do they feel about paying fees for every vote, and also that it is going to be token based? Yeah, have we done some sort of business validation for that?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? I got a notification in the first tab. You said guilds and like.
Yeah,
sorry.
I mean, I'm just curious if we did some sort of business validation as to how much Davi will be adopted by other projects in the ecosystem, because this is going to be all on chain, so which means like, yeah, the voters have to pay fees. Are we going to include Bioeconomy where we pay for fees? Yeah, exactly. I mean, do we have some kind of launch partners outside of the DXDAO products?
Yeah, and maybe Ross could speak to this, but I mean, I think Davi is a stand-in for a core governance structure, and I think DXDAO is the core user of that governance structure, and I don't really think that's fully finished until Davi has governance 2.0 and DXDAO is running on it. So I think the guilds right now are a piece of that, and you can obviously have like a rep-based model on that. But I think like long term, what you're building for, it's both DXDAO and servicing DXDAO, but then also using that model to service others. And so like I wouldn't think it would just be like our guild's going to be adopted next year or something.
Yeah, just to add on to that, like we know many people here have had conversations over the last year, and these are hypothetical conversations because we don't have anything to show. But when you explain the idea of governance 2.0 and why it's important and why DXDAO needs it, and then if you have that conversation with people in the space, they're like, oh, that's really interesting. That's a new thing compared to liquid token governance. And that end thing is governance 2.0. That's actually the thing that DXDAO needs. That's the thing that DXDAO is building and was supposed to be building this entire time. That governance 2.0, a combination of liquid token governance with non-transferable token governance and combining it in some way, hopefully in a super flexible way where anyone can change it to how they want, is the interesting thing that at the end of the day, when you explain that to people already, they're like, oh, that's really interesting. We very rarely have ever just explained Davi or ERC20 guilds to people because that's like a step along the way. But like that's, as we know, like ERC20 token voting on mainnet Ethereum is not, it already exists, right? Like it's not very unique. It's the governance 2.0 thing is the unique thing that we've been talking about for 2 years now, and people are interested in. The risk is that we're too late, right? That by the time that comes out, which we're building for ourselves, by the time that comes out, maybe there's a lot of other solutions that accomplish something like governance 2.0. And ever since the Soulbound token launched and everyone's talking about like reputational based governance and other ways and bicameral systems like Optimism's using, lots of people are experimenting in this space. And so it's a competitive environment. And so it's very hard to know, like the fact that we can't actually use it ourselves or show anyone what we're talking about. We just speak about it hypothetically. People are like, yeah, oh, that sounds awesome. Like when you explain governance 2.0 to pretty much everyone in the space that knows anything about governance, they're like, that sounds really interesting. Even like the biggest investors in Brave also think that sounds really interesting. Like you can sell it, you can explain it really well, but whether or not people can use it, Copenhagen Flames were also supposed to use some of our governance stuff, and we never got to try. But like whether or not this, like doing all this research and knowing if people are interested in it before we build it, in terms of governance, we never even had that conversation. We're building this thing because DXDAO needs governance 2.0. Like that's the reason we're now building it. Whether or not, and the assumption that we're making is if DXDAO needs it and it's the only solution that we actually will solve our needs, we think that other people would probably also get value out of it. But all we can do is hypothetically talk about it. And when we've done that in the past about governance 2.0, people seem interested in it. But the question is, yeah, is it still relevant to people? We've been talking about it for 2 years to people. Is it still relevant is the question.
Yeah, I mean, my only reason why I'm asking was that I totally understand the reason of governance 2.0, but since we are going to be using that as the flagship product, and then every other budgetary discussions and the investments or everything would be hinged upon the success of this, I am a little bit um, I'm a little bit skeptical towards, yeah, should we have a flagship product like that?
Yeah, that's a good question because these are building blocks. Like if you took Keenan's graphic with all those different things, as we talked about the retreat, you could actually replace different parts of that with products that already exist in the space. So you could actually have, Carrot and Swapper tie together, and it could actually, in the middle, instead of Davi, someone could use a Gnosis Safe. Now, like you can replace, because these are all interoperable, you could actually build an infrastructure like that with products that already exist in this space, or if someone already has one of the things, like if Balancer already has Balancer, but they actually want to use Davi and Carrot, they could use Balancer with Davi and Carrot. They don't have to use Swapper. So that's always going to be the option of communities to take certain parts of the suite and replace different parts of the suite. But to your question, Venki, yes, like is Davi going to be the thing that sucks everyone in, and then everything is based around Davi, and that is why it's successful? That's an unknown, for sure.
Cool. All right.
I like building for DAOs, Chris. But yeah, I don't think we don't want this approach to be putting all our eggs in one basket, but at the same time, we almost need to make a bet in something that we believe in. I think, Chris, you made a good point about this at the retreat, if I recall correctly. But I mean, if we believe in DAOs and we believe in the future and that we have a system that is unique and provide something novel, and we can kind of tie it into this ecosystem of products that we already are building, it seems like a reasonable bet to make as an organization in my eyes.
Yeah, I'd say, like, what is DXDAO's competitive advantage? Like, this is all, we're all trying to build something new. It's all going to be a crapshoot at best. And so what is the way that we can increase our percentage the most? And I would say DXDAO's competitive advantage is that it knows what DAOs need, and because it is a DAO, And I think just the only way to take advantage of that is by building them, therefore, like for DXDAO, for DAOs, and then that is a way to inspire the types of products and product direction they should go in.
Cool. And the last thing I want to highlight here for phase 3 is kind of the individual squad actions that I presented at the retreat. I guess I could share my screen again, but I don't want to hold this hostage any further, since I imagine that a lot of these focuses will be for phase 3 specifically. But I think contextualizing a lot of what we're talking about here, kind of, and how that works going forward. And a good example I put here is kind of my chat about DXGov as kind of some bullet points. And these are, of course, opinionated, not with DAO as ratified in any capacity. But just kind of like what we can kind of look to discuss over these next couple of months. I say ascertaining governance 2.0 is priority number 1, continuing forward on that front. And then, of course, once the governance stage of the pipeline is operable, pivoting focus to the social element of DAOs. How can DAOs natively cooperate directly within our pipeline, governance as a service, native bounty boards, Shopify of DAOs, providing some kind of easy out-of-the-box solution to, tackling these problems, or like, what is your DAO? I think might be an interesting way to move forward. And I just kind of say this to contextualize it. Apple uses iMessage as an ease-of-use concept and forcing function for use of their phones. How can we adopt that mantra while retaining open source and decentralized values? In the sense that, like, iMessage isn't an insane product. It's kind of just Wi-Fi texting, right? It's nothing crazy, but it does provide this moat where it's like, okay, why would I not want to be in this ecosystem, especially if you're already inside of it? Of course, not looking to fight with any Android people here in the chat.
Yeah, so I mean, you don't have another alternative for iMessage if you're using an iPhone, right?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
You don't have an alternative for iMessage if you're using an iPhone, right? So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so I mean, we cannot compare iMessage with any of the products that we are building, man. It sounds nice, but it's totally polar opposites.
And to be clear, it's not what we're building now. This is like looking forward and where Davi and the governance team can point their attention at. Like, the social element of DAOs is where that lies, in my opinion. Like, what can we add as, like, even just a simple ease of use to the pipeline of the creation of a DAO or deployment of a DAO that kind of operates in the same way. I mean, like, I don't imagine it's anything that we have right now that is this iMessage, or like you can't go anywhere else. But very, very simple yet high ease of use, like high value things that we can integrate to our pipeline that work in our pipeline and not anywhere else, right? I don't know if I have the answer to what that is exactly. I imagine this kind of native social kind of element to DAOs and how they can interconnect is kind of how that works. Like, okay, if we both have a DAO on Davi, like, what tools can we use to just natively like work together, right? But that's my thought. But yeah, I agree. It's like, of course, replacements for the things we have right now makes sense. But it's more so like forward thinking. Anyways, I won't dwell on this topic either, because I think it's like phase 3. We'll really dive into like what this looks like and how we can move forward. It's more so setting the direction now. I just wanted to highlight that. Yeah, I think that's kind of the key topics. I know here at the bottom, like, a massive thank you to everyone that participated at the retreat, or even tried to do their best to tune in. The discussions were super, super great, quality, healthy. And I think we really moved in a direction where we're starting to understand what we are and what we want to do. And yeah, I'm super happy with where we are. If I've missed anything, or there's any topics that should be added to this, please feel free to add them. Anyone's, of course, anyone is able to make these posts or signal proposals. So anything I've missed or any disagreements, please share. I think like the discussion element, like this call specifically, is one of the key, off-chain consensus collection mechanisms. Of course, there's these polls, but they kind of act as forcing functions really someone like Venki coming in with all of these questions, especially as someone that was outside of the retreat, and allowing everyone to talk about them and kind of figure out, okay, what are these, what is going on here? What are the intricacies of it? I think that's kind of where we reach a mutual understanding of them. And of course, if any changes need to be made, that's when they can be made. Yeah, more questions. Please, more questions, Venki. Questions are super, super valuable, I think. I guess considering this, and I'm not sure what you're thinking, Chris, but the original deadline for the submission of the phase 2 proposal was October 31st. That is Monday. I think because of travel, I was a bit sick, and this is out a day or two later than I wanted it to be. I'm thinking it makes sense to defer the submission date until after the governance call at minimum next week. I'm not sure if there's any opinions on that, but I think, of course, this period of time is very valuable, and it shouldn't go to a Sigma proposal after only being deliberated for a couple of days, and of course, a couple of those days being a weekend. That's my perception. See a thumbs up. But yeah, I think that does it for me. Thank you for the time, of course.
Thanks, Keenan. I've been listening, like, from kind of a third-party standpoint here, and finding ourselves in some kind of groups and like asking each other, what are you going to do about that? It's kind of a weird dynamic. Like, why should Ross have to answer about what the purpose or future strategy of the guild should be? Yes, he's kind of like the team lead, but any one of us is equally responsible. And like, if we don't take part along the way, we cannot just wait and then ask Ross, what's your strategy, right? So it's like, what is our strategy? And at the retreat, we were talking about what the mission of the DAO should be when we face the world, but like, what is also our mission as a DAO within ourselves as a collective? And I think the word should be connections. Connections on a social level between teams and members, and on the other hand, connection on a technical level between the products. And instead of like thinking of a flagship product, let's just talk about interoperability and connections. Let's connect the products. And also, there are valid points, people are raising on the call, like what's kind of like the launch strategy. For example, if we take Nimi, it's easy to onboard tens of thousands of people with Nimi. So we could probably start with Nimi. And then we could, of course, we don't have Aqua, but it would have been cool to have Aqua. And then Aqua could be incorporated with Carrot. And then all of that plays in with Swapper. And so, and when you think about it, all these parts working together sound amazing. And you can't say whichever is like the main part or the pilot or flagship. It's all about connections. So, but we all have to start with the social connections, feel like a team again, because we don't feel much like a team. We're kind of like these individuals, and at times we clash with each other. We should connect, feel like a team, work together, and then also create these connections between the products as well on a technical level.
And maybe I'll add to that quickly. Thank you, Nathan. I agree, strongly agree with everything you're saying. I think that's what you're describing really isn't that far disconnected from this idea of a flagship product, in the sense that, like, what are we trying to do and how do we coordinate? And I just see Venki's comment, like, flagship kind of threw me off guard because flagship means all hands in this product, in his previous startup. And I think my actual interpretation of this is that is something that we want. We want to solve a goal as an organization. We want to stop becoming, I guess, heroes in the sense that the squads have individual focuses that are disconnected from this overarching vision. And I think, of course, squads still exist and still interconnect outside of this flagship product. But my interpretation is that this is what DXDAO wants to build, not only for itself. Not necessarily all hands on a product, but all hands on a vision. It makes a lot of sense. And I don't think it inhibits or limits in any way our focuses, these connections, in the sense that, like, if we're working on this flagship product, which I kind of interpret, of course, being built around Davi, maybe led by the Davi team, I think DXO still has plenty of room to incubate, even outside of anything relevant to this pipeline. For example, if we have a product idea that just makes sense and can't fit in this pipeline, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't focus on it. But instead curating this kind of vision and direction. And of course, when we're talking about this flagship, having all squads working and thinking on it, of course, all hands on deck, is actually my kind of interpretation. I think it's important structurally and not something that we've had before. But that's my thoughts. And I don't want to let this call run any longer than I've made it already.
No, it's been amazing. And I don't know what the reason is why we don't have many more people on this call, but like, I wish I could see like at least 30 people on this call, and we just a dozen of us. I think a lot of them are still traveling, and it's good we're recording, so if they have the time, they could listen to it. But we should be having more conversations like this. It's almost like a virtual retreat. And we've been saying this time and time again. Like, I know the structure of the calls is tiring, and so many calls we have. Like, each of us has like 2 or 3 calls a day outside of the regular calls, and it's tiring. But like, we could easily have a call like this whenever we want it. I'm not saying we should have it and proposing anything, but we could literally have a call like this whenever we want it. And it's as easy as this. The more we talk about it, the more the idea would crystallize in our heads how we should move forward. And I think we'll end up agreeing on a lot of things, and it just gets easier. Yeah, I think it would be ideal for a conversation like this to continue on the Monday call. What do you think, Sky?
Yeah, we can continue this, but
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, I was just gonna say Monday definitely makes sense for some kind of dialogue. Maybe some additional like forum questions or like comments over the weekend to kind of reflect upon on that Monday call. And I guess really the takeaway from that call will determine whether or not we need to push back to the governance call, which of course would be the more formalized one. But we can chat about that next week, I think.
yeah, I see one conflict where the phase 2, Keenan, with like these budget numbers, which are assuming DXDAO is going to work the way it's been working and is organized the way it's been organized. But if you actually alter the entire system into like full on their own budgets for different squads and things, like the swapper squad might say over the next 6 months, we need $2 million because we're going to hire a bunch of people. We're going to hire some senior devs. Like right away, that destroys the established budget in the phase 1, phase 2 restructuring. Like it's totally different model. So they don't go together. So by passing phase 2, these questions, and then restructuring into squad accountability, and then the squads have to come up with their own budgets, it literally does not fit together with what we're just passed in phase 1 and phase 2.
So I think there's 2 key ways to perceive this. First of all, the reason we're not making any formalized action-based decisions in this and instead are setting a direction is that phase 3 is entirely surrounding the execution of those larger ideas and how we restructure. So like you said, maybe the budget is impacted in a certain kind of way relative to the phase 1 proposal. But the important and key point of phase 3 is the execution of what we have learned and kind of solidified in phase 2. If we can all unanimously agree, for example, to integrate a 6-month budgetary cycle and give squads more autonomy, and run through the priorities board and kind of have this flagship focus and DXDAO underlying priority. That's all super important. I think that guides the decision making and those squad budgets. And I think the passage of this doesn't implicate the creation of a squad budget, but instead the execution of phase 3, what exactly we want to do and how we capitalize on it is how that's guided. So I agree with what you're saying, but I think it's almost a different discussion in my eyes, and it's kind of accounted for in the original Sigma proposal.
Yeah, I mean, okay, it says in phase 2 there's no budget implication, but the budget implication was passed in phase 1, and like that established numbers. And now if we change things, those numbers mean nothing.
I don't really follow, Scott. It seems like you're really nitpicking here. I mean, we're going to go through a budgetary process where if Swapper wants to request $2 million, they can request $2 million and they'll have to justify it, and there will be a conversation about it. I think signaling future direction and how things like should we can try to operate doesn't handcuff you in the future on being able to operate. And I don't really think the phase 1 it says anything about like I guess like you're saying that the numbers in phase 1 need to be followed through the entire time, or else that like nullifies the existence of the whole process.
I'm saying what were the if we're changing the way the system's working, putting some numbers around the older system and fitting a budget, that is confusing because it's two different systems, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the outcome of this will be a clear budget. I don't think that's fitting an overall budget from anything.
Gotcha.
Like, I think this is more of an outcomes based.
Makes sense. Right.
Yeah, and I think there's also some confusion in the idea of a budget impact. And I will just reiterate that phase 1 / the initial proposal highlighted budgetary impact, but didn't use it as a crux of like, okay, this is what we're doing. We're trying to move the budget from 4 to 2.5 million specifically. I don't think that was what was passed on chain. Of course, there's the event and kind of auditing budget portions, but those weren't to move this larger goalpost, but instead kind of add some accountability to events and auditing specifically. But yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. It seems like we're all interpreting it in different ways. For me, it was straightforward. I wasn't confused. The way I interpreted it, and maybe it's not the right one, but it was like what we passed in phase 1 was a certain budget for the DAO and each squad. And that even though we're doing some restructuring in phase 2, it will be working within the budget restrictions from phase 1. And like, I don't have issues with that per se, but like that's how I thought it is, straightforward. But yeah, maybe if different people have questions, wonder how it actually works, we could work on the verbiage, like documentation to make it clear so that there's no confusion. Yeah. Maybe, I don't know. What do people think? Is it easier to work on DAO Talk, like comment on DAO Talk and progress the conversation and discussions there? If there's a need to make any changes, or should we kind of like have this, how we make articles before we publish? A bunch of people comment on a doc, and then we decide whether we merge some suggestions. Is that necessary, or is it going to like be too complicated?
Now. It's on DAO Talk now, so that's where the conversation is, I think.
Yeah, better be good public. Yeah.
But I think capturing it on DAO Talk, I think too often we just kind of talk about things on calls, but I think capturing it on DAO Talk is very important for how this goes forward. So looking forward to conversation there.
Yeah, makes sense to have it like public, documented. So yeah, in that case, we urge everyone to please comment if they have any questions, because if you don't raise any questions right now or comment, if you comment later on, it's actually on you. you cannot comment later on. Now's the time. Yeah, so good. I hope this was a productive call. We can end it here. We're over the hour. I hope those that couldn't make it listen to it, because I find it useful. Thanks everyone for attending. Have a lovely Friday. Enjoy the weekend. Some of you are having holidays next week. Enjoy.
Thank you, Nathan.
Cheers.
And saw your post. So I
Yeah.
guess this is maybe the last product strategy. And I think thank you for
Yeah.
hosting this and all you've kind of done there. Yeah, I think we need to chat about what happens going forward. But
Yeah.
thank you. So I guess thank you for your service. Is that the
Thank you. It was an honor.
Thank you, Nathan.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Nathan.
Thanks everyone.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye bye.
Cheers.
Bye. Have a nice weekend.